They said the castle was near, but the fog had a way of folding distance into illusion. Every step toward it felt like stepping further into myself, a place equally unreachable. The road was silent, except for the soft crunch of snow beneath my feet, and even that sound seemed to accuse me of trespassing in a realm that was never meant to be entered. Somewhere above, hidden by clouds, the castle breathed. Or perhaps it only waited. I could not tell whether it summoned me, or tolerated my presence out of some cruel indifference. Yet I kept walking. Not because I believed I would arrive, but because stopping felt like an even greater surrender to the absurd. The villagers spoke of the castle in whispers, as though its name carried the weight of unseen judgment. They told me the paths change at night, that messages are sent but never received, that those who seek answers are catalogued but never called. I nodded politely, as if I understood, though I did not. I only knew that to seek meaning is to invite misunderstanding, the kind that stains the soul quietly, like ink seeping into paper. Each morning I awoke with the same intention to make progress. Yet progress is a word invented by those who believe time is linear. Here, time circles itself. Letters arrive without signatures, doors lead to rooms that rearrange themselves, and every conversation ends in polite dismissal. Still I ask, still I write, still I wait. Sometimes I wonder if the castle is not a place but a reflection, a mirage of validation, a structure built from the scaffolding of human longing. Perhaps the messengers, the clerks, the unseen authorities are fragments of my own divided conscience, shuffling papers in an endless attempt to justify existence. If so, then the denial I face is self-authored, the rejection deeply personal, the inaccessibility entirely my own design. At night, the lights in the castle flicker faintly. Or perhaps my imagination paints them, there to keep despair from solidifying into stone. I watch those lights and think, maybe meaning does not dwell within the castle at all, but in the pursuit that never ends, in the cold that never yields, in the questions that refuse to be silenced. The tragedy is not that the castle cannot be reached. The tragedy is that even if I did arrive, I would find no one waiting, only an empty desk, a single chair, and a mirror reflecting the face of one who never truly left the snow. And so, I continue, toward the flicker that may be hope, or madness, or both. Because to stop walking would be to accept that the castle was never real. And I am not yet ready to believe that the world is nothing but its own silence. The illusion of arrival is perhaps the most merciless deception of all. It is the quiet promise whispered by distance, that somewhere, beyond the fog and confusion, lies completion. Every footstep carries a silent conviction that movement itself implies progress, that effort will yield reward, that there exists a final door where uncertainty dissolves into understanding. Yet each time the horizon appears closer, it slips backward, folding itself into a mirage of purpose. The castle gleams faintly on the edge of sight, not as a destination, but as a reflection of yearning itself. To move toward it is to believe that meaning is external, that salvation awaits in some far-off structure of reason and order. But the truth is far less forgiving. Arrival does not exist, because there was never anywhere else to go. The mind hungers for closure, for a moment when confusion kneels before clarity, when the wandering stops. But the human condition offers no such kindness. What we call arrival is only a pause between illusions, a fleeting stillness mistaken for permanence. We celebrate small triumphs as if they were endings, but they are merely brief intermissions before the next pursuit begins. The castle changes form with every approach, as if mocking the notion of completion. Sometimes it appears vast and welcoming, its windows lit with the warmth of understanding. Other times it recedes into abstraction, becoming an idea too faint to grasp. The illusion is sustained not by the castle's mystery, but by our refusal to accept the futility of the search. We are creatures addicted to the horizon. Even in moments of supposed arrival, the job secured, the goal achieved, the love attained, there is a quiet void that follows, an echo that asks, is this all? It is in that silence that the illusion reveals itself most cruelly. The mind unable to rest, constructs another destination, another castle to chase. The cycle repeats endlessly, each illusion of arrival leading to a deeper form of exile. One becomes a traveler in perpetuity, carrying the ache of unfinishedness like a birthright. The castle's walls are not made of stone but of expectation. Its gates are forged from the belief that meaning must be earned. But meaning is not waiting at the top of a hill or behind an ornate door. It lingers in the act of pursuit itself. Still we resist this truth, for it is unbearable to think that all roads lead inward. To the same self we are trying to escape. The illusion of arrival comforts us with the fantasy of escape, of transformation, of eventual peace. Yet every step only returns us to the same question, whispered by the snow, by the wind, by the hollow spaces of the soul. If the destination does not exist, then what compels us to keep walking? Perhaps it is not hope but fear. The fear that stillness might reveal the void we carry within, the one no castle can ever fill. The bureaucracy of the soul is an invisible labyrinth, one without clerks or corridors, yet filled with endless paperwork of conscience and self-doubt. Within it, each thought must be processed, stamped, and filed before it can be believed. Every desire requires authorization. Every dream must pass through unseen offices of moral inspection. It is not that the soul is unwilling to move forward, but that it must constantly seek approval from forces it cannot name. Somewhere deep inside, an unseen official decides whether we are worthy of peace, happiness, or clarity, and that decision never arrives. There are forms that never reach their destination, letters returned without reason, and waiting rooms that echo with the sound of our own uncertain breathing. This inner bureaucracy is the quiet machinery of hesitation, the system that keeps us bound to our doubts. It is built from the rules we inherited without consent, the subtle edicts of family, society, and the world that told us who we should be before we had the courage to ask who we are. Each regulation carved into the subconscious becomes another wall, another locked cabinet of unprocessed emotion, and like the endless corridors of the castle, these walls shift and rearrange, ensuring that just when we believe we have found the right door, another appears, requiring yet another signature, another justification for existence. The soul becomes its own administrator, drafting arguments for why it deserves to feel alive. We often imagine freedom as an escape from external control, and yet the deeper imprisonment is internal. There is no greater oppressor than the unseen official within. The voice that demands explanation for every feeling, that asks endlessly for evidence before allowing joy, that rejects any act of self-forgiveness for lack of proper documentation. It is an office without windows, where the light of understanding never fully enters. The bureaucrat within stamps each hope with red ink, marking it, pending review. We tell ourselves that soon, after enough effort, we will be cleared for contentment. But the approval never comes. The system survives on delay. Even love, even faith, even the desire for meaning must pass through this bureaucracy. The heart files its petitions, but somewhere they get lost in transit, buried under the weight of uncertainty. The soul becomes exhausted, not from rejection, but from the endless process of waiting, the perpetual anticipation of permission to live. The irony is cruel. The longer we wait for validation, the more distant it becomes. The castle of the self, with its infinite records and shifting officials, sustains itself through confusion. It ensures that no one ever truly arrives, that no question is ever fully answered. And yet, we continue to write our applications, believing that one day the letter will come, the one that confirms our worth, our belonging, our purpose. We wait beside an empty desk, listening for footsteps in a hallway that may not exist, hoping the unseen bureaucrat will finally stamp our existence as approved. The silence between meaning and madness is a narrow corridor, a place where language begins to crumble under the weight of its own insufficiency. It is the stillness that follows every unanswered question, the hollow pause between what we feel and what we can express. In that silence, the world loses its outline, and the self becomes a trembling shadow searching for definition. Meaning, once thought to be solid, begins to dissolve into abstraction, while madness waits quietly at the edges, patient and intimate. One does not leap from one to the other, one drifts, slowly, as though carried by a wind that has forgotten its direction. It is not the absence of sound that defines this silence, but the absence of understanding. Words become lifeless forms, moving through the air without substance, unable to bridge the chasm between the inner world and the outer one. You speak, and yet nothing reaches the other side. You think, and yet thought feels like an echo without origin. This is the quiet despair of the human condition, to exist between comprehension and chaos, to sense that meaning might exist somewhere, but to be forever denied its certainty. The silence does not shout or threaten, it seeps gently into the bones until one can no longer tell whether the stillness is peace or paralysis. Perhaps madness is only the attempt to fill this silence, to give sound to the void that meaning abandoned. The mind, unable to tolerate uncertainty, invents narratives, shapes, and symbols to protect itself from the enormity of unknowing. It constructs reasons where none exist, scaffolding over the abyss to preserve the illusion of coherence. But meaning itself is not stable, it flickers like a dying candle, and each time it dims, the shadows grow longer. The silence remains patient, unyielding, a mirror reflecting the futility of the search. It does not need to destroy. It simply waits until the seeker collapses under the weight of his own questions. There are moments when the silence almost feels merciful, when one accepts that not everything must be understood. In that acceptance, there is a fragile calm, a surrender to mystery. But the calm never lasts, because the mind is an instrument built to interpret, to categorize, to assign value. When meaning withdraws, the mind turns upon itself, dissecting its own confusion until it bleeds. The silence then becomes unbearable, not because it is empty, but because it reflects too clearly the hollowness within. In this space between meaning and madness, the world feels both familiar and foreign. The castle looms in the distance, inscrutable and mute, its presence both reassurance and torment. One waits for a message, for a sign, for a voice that will pierce the quiet with certainty. But none comes. Only the echo of one's own thoughts returns, distorted and weary. And so, we stand in that silence, half awake, half lost, uncertain whether we are seekers of truth or prisoners of our own imagination. The unreachable authority of purpose stands like the castle itself, distant, veiled in mist, and indifferent to the desperate pilgrim below. It is that faint, oppressive sense that somewhere, beyond comprehension, there exists a system that governs meaning, a hierarchy that decides what is worthy and what is not. We live beneath its gaze without ever seeing its face. Each action feels like an appeal to an unseen tribunal, a plea for acknowledgement that may never come. The authority does not command through presence, but through absence. Its power is sustained by the impossibility of its approach. To seek it is to submit to its silence, to wait for a verdict that will never be delivered. The soul yearns for validation, for some sign that its suffering serves a design, that the confusion is not without architecture. Yet the deeper one reaches for purpose, the more it retreats, as though mocking the very hunger that gives it life. It is not cruelty that keeps purpose hidden, but an indifference so vast it feels divine. The castle does not deny, it simply does not answer. And in that lack of response, we construct our own hierarchies, gods, philosophies, systems of morality, all desperate attempts to translate the silence into meaning. Each doctrine is another corridor, in an endless bureaucracy of justification, another layer between the seeker and the source. Purpose is the most elaborate illusion ever devised, sustained not by truth but by necessity. Without it, the structure of being collapses into chaos, and so we invent purposes as one might invent gods, to soothe the ache of incomprehension. Yet even as we kneel before them, we sense their fragility. We build our lives upon shifting sands, convincing ourselves that the foundation is firm. But late at night, when the noise of the world fades, there is a whisper that cuts through. What if purpose is not given, but fabricated? What if there is no authority at all, only the echo of our own need for order? Still, The human heart cannot exist in pure indifference. It demands hierarchy, direction, and reward. It needs to believe that effort leads somewhere, that devotion is noticed, that existence carries a stamp of approval from some higher office of being. The unreachable authority becomes both tormentor and protector, an invisible presence that grants significance to our despair. Without it, the world becomes flat, ungoverned, and unbearable. So we continue to write letters addressed to the castle, prayers disguised as purpose, ambitions dressed as obedience, waiting for a reply that never arrives. And perhaps that is the final irony. That purpose is only unreachable because it never existed outside of ourselves. The authority we seek sits quietly within, disguised as expectation, reflected in every unanswered question we refuse to stop asking. We stand before the castle gates, trembling, certain that beyond them lies the truth, yet never realizing that the gates were never locked, only drawn by the boundaries of our own fear. The exile within the self is the most intimate form of banishment, a quiet estrangement that occurs not between one and the world, but within the boundaries of one's own being. It is the feeling of standing before the mirror and recognizing the face, yet sensing that the person behind it has long since departed. This exile does not announce itself. It creeps in slowly, like fog seeping beneath a closed door, until every thought feels foreign, every emotion borrowed. One becomes a stranger inhabiting the ruins of familiarity, compelled to act, to speak, to function, all while secretly aware that the true inhabitant of the body is elsewhere, unreachable, observing from a distance that cannot be crossed. There is no punishment more subtle than this inward separation. The world may imprison the body, but the self imprisons the soul. Within the castle of one's own consciousness, corridors lead nowhere, and each room mirrors another in infinite repetition. The more one searches for authenticity, the more elusive it becomes, as though the act of seeking displaces the very essence one hopes to find. It is a paradox of existence to look inward, is to discover division, to peel away layers only to find more disguises beneath. The self becomes both warden and captive, endlessly interrogating itself, demanding answers to questions that dissolve upon inspection. In this state, even silence becomes oppressive, for it echoes with the voices of all the selves one has failed to become. The exile within does not crave return to a homeland. It craves coherence, a sense that the fragments still belong to a single whole. But the unity of the self is a myth, a comforting fiction. What we call I is merely a collection of roles, fears, and half-formed desires, bound loosely by memory. To live in awareness of this fragmentation is to walk perpetually through the fog, never certain which version of oneself is speaking, thinking, or feeling. The castle looms as a symbol of that unreachable center, the place where all contradictions might reconcile, where the divided self could finally rest. Yet the more one walks toward it, the further it recedes, reflecting back the endless multiplicity of identity. Exile, then, is not a condition to be escaped, but an unavoidable truth to be endured. The self is not a home, but a shifting landscape, and belonging is always temporary. There are moments when the fragments align, fleeting seconds of peace when thought and being move together, when one feels briefly whole. But these moments pass like shadows, leaving behind only the ache of their absence. The exile resumes, quieter but deeper, as if the soul has accepted that no return is possible. Still, something compels us to continue the search, not for redemption, but for recognition, to find, in the chaos of the self, a shape that resembles meaning. We wander the corridors of our own minds, tracing the same steps, revisiting the same questions, not because we expect an answer, but because even in exile, the act of seeking reminds us that somewhere beneath the shifting walls, the heart still waits to be found. In the end, the castle remains, distant, unmoved, and shrouded in its eternal mist. Its presence lingers not as a promise of arrival, but as a mirror reflecting the endless search that defines the human condition. We wander its outskirts, burdened by questions that have no destination, driven by a hunger that no revelation can satisfy. The illusion of arrival keeps our feet moving, The bureaucracy of the soul keeps our hope entangled. The silence between meaning and madness hums like a quiet storm beneath our thoughts. The unreachable authority of purpose governs our devotion, and the exile within the self ensures we never truly belong, not to the world, nor to ourselves. Perhaps this is the quiet truth the castle conceals, that there is no message waiting to be received, no final understanding hidden behind its walls. The search itself is the meaning, the waiting itself the purpose. Each unanswered letter, each step through the snow, each night spent watching distant lights, all of it forms the architecture of existence. The castle is not a place to be entered, but a presence to be endured. And yet, in that endurance, something fragile and strangely beautiful emerges, a quiet dignity in the act of seeking, even without reward. For though the gates never open, though no voice ever calls our name, we continue to walk. Not out of faith, nor of certainty, but out of the silent understanding that to move toward the unreachable is what it means to be alive.